the talk or even now, you can go into the Q&A box and ask questions, because at the end of the talk, we're going to be doing a Q&A. Oh, Evan, did you say Neve Faulkner? I see a Neve.
O'Kelly. No, she's Neve O'Kelly.
Oh, okay, sorry. Natalie, well, there's somebody from Longford, Ireland, another person from Limerick, another from Dublin. Oh, Natalie. Well, there's a person attending. It just says Natalie though, no last name. Could that be her?
No. Neve. Niamh.
Okay. Oh, okay. Then there's a Neve, but just different last name.
No. I don't know. We'll see.
Just gonna check, because last time I noticed we had a few last people sign up on the Eventbrite.
Yeah.
And they did, because I sent the Zoom link. They didn't. I sent the Zoom link an hour beforehand. They didn't get it. So yeah, there's a few last minute people. Let me. Oh, Neve O'Kelly. Is that who it is?
Yes, that one. That's, yeah. If you see her.
Okay, she's one of the last minute ones. It's fine. No, I just have to do this manually. I'm just gonna do it from my personal account because I don't have the. Well, let me do it from. I'll do it from the WIRI Gmail. So just give me. So right now, in the past 10 minutes, we've had like 10 more people register. So I'm using the WIRI email. I'll forward them the Zoom link because they weren't on the link, obviously, that I sent half an hour ago.
Okay.
So then once I get this, then we can launch it. Just give it a few more minutes anyway for everyone, because now, yeah, we're up to 61 attendees. So we're asking for those attending, as you're logging in, if you wouldn't mind going into the chat box and telling us where you're located, because we'd like to see the diversity of where everyone is from. So we see people from Northern Ireland, from Maynooth. Somebody who's Welsh, but they are at Trinity. Okay, we'll start in a few minutes. I'm just sending a few people registered last minute on the Eventbrite, so I'm just sending them the link, and then we'll get started. Okay, I just sent the Zoom link to the final registrants. Okay, so is everyone ready to get started?
Perfect, yes.
Okay.
Stop sharing video.
Yes, and we're asking that everyone, as you log in, the new attendees, which now we're up to 85 attendees, if you can write in the chat box where you're located, because we just want to see the diversity of where everyone is from during this talk. So first, I'd like to say welcome to everybody to Women in Research Ireland's second online event. My name is Dr. Susan Feddix, and I'm co-director and co-founder of Women in Research Ireland, otherwise called WIRI. And today we have a discussion on the first Black Studies module in Ireland, taught at University College Dublin, and for those outside Ireland, it's also known as UCD. We will hear from instructor Dr. Ebun Joseph and 3 of our students who have taken the course. However, first I'd like to give an introduction to my fellow members of WIRI who are also participating in the webinar's panelists. So first, I'd like to say hi to Dr. Joanne Kenny, who is fellow co-director of WIRI.
Hi, everyone.
And then Ms. Martha Goldman, she is our treasurer and co-founder of WIRI.
Hi.
Martha. Dr. Kathy Corcoran, she's a committee member.
Welcome, everyone.
And Ms. Rebecca Emmett, she's also a committee member, who I believe she's present. Also, we'd like to thank the Royal Society of Chemistry, Inclusion, and Diversity Fund for their financial support. We would also like to thank Zoom for sponsoring these initial WIRI webinars. And also, we are encouraging live tweeting. So if you can use the hashtag either Black Studies or Black Lives Matter, that would be fabulous. So now, just a brief introduction to Women in Research Ireland, WIRI, for people who are attending for the first time. We are a volunteer-run registered charity founded in Dublin in 2017. And our mission is to build a community which unites women and other underrepresented groups. We also look to maintain a platform for unheard voices to discuss issues and create change. We have been hosting monthly events until March of this year, but then due to the pandemic, now we have switched over to online events. So please follow us on Twitter and Instagram to learn about future events. And now let's move on to the discussion for today. So the module entitled Black Studies and Critical Race Perspectives in Education at UCD examines the histories, social movements, and contributions of people of African descent while looking at contemporary forms of Blackness in society and around the world. The module began in 2018, and its instructor, Dr. Ebun Joseph, will talk today. In November 2019, the UCD African Society hosted an evening event which gave a glimpse into Black studies. I attended this event and left with such renewed awareness about myself, having heard the genuine and frank voices of these young students, And very soon after this event, I contacted Dr. Joseph and invited her and her students to share their words with WIRI's audience so that we can all learn about ourselves and others from awareness of our similarities as well as our differences. And as we know, as we've all seen what's going on today, it's a global discussion on racism that's happening right now. And so from the recent murder of George Floyd and the protests occurring across the states and many other countries around the world, ignorance still exists at home and abroad. And since change begins within, I want to thank everyone for attending today. Now to introduce our panelists. First, I will introduce the lecturer, Dr. Ebun Joseph. She's an accomplished author, lecturer, career, and life coach. She is seen and heard on TV, radio, and other media discussing racism and direct provision in Ireland. In 2002, she came to Ireland from Nigeria. Her PhD is on social justice, and she lectures at both Trinity College Dublin and UCD. She recently hosted a series of webinars entitled Visible Racism in Ireland with COVID-19. Dr. Joseph is also chairperson of African Scholars Association Ireland and co-author of the book Challenging Perspectives of Africa in Schools, Critical Approaches to Global Justice Education, with Routledge and her book Racial Stratification in Ireland, a Critical Race Theory of Labor Market Inequality with Manchester University, due in July. Dr. Joseph will speak following the students, but first, our first student that will be speaking is Agogo Akpora. She is now a final year student of Biomedical Health and Life Sciences at UCD. She was a former president of UCD African Society in 2019 to 2020. She also writes a blog speaking on topics including Black social justice issues. Agogo?
Okay, hi everybody. My name is Agogo, and I'm one of the students of, well, the ex-students of Dr. Ebun's module called Black Studies. And when I first chose to do the module, I was really excited about doing it because I'd never actually learned about anything to do with Black history or with Black people really in general. And throughout my education, throughout primary school and secondary school, there was a tiny bit here and there in classes like CSPE when we might learn about Nelson Mandela or something, but there was never an extensive type of teaching. So I was really excited to learn what I would in the module, and I gained a lot. It was the first time I had ever been taught by a Black teacher, a woman or man, so it was a new experience. And I realized as I started the module that I had to go through a process of a lot of unlearning, because I feel like throughout school, I was kind of taught everything through a white lens. And it really taught me that everything, like I was taught of a history essentially that was centered around white people, and minorities were not really spoken about. They weren't really represented in that history or in a lot of the things that I was studying in school. But when I entered the Black Studies module, I began to see things from a different perspective, and it was really interesting. One of the things that Dr. Ebun taught us about was even our unconscious bias, how sometimes we don't even realize that we see things as differently because of how much we are used to seeing things already. So that was something I had to definitely learn. I definitely had to go through a lot of unlearning. And it really made me realize the importance of, like, taking this module really made me realize the importance of representation, of seeing people that look like you when you are in education and when you are learning things. Because a lot of the times what I learned in school, in secondary school particularly, I didn't learn of many Black figures. I didn't learn of anybody important that looked like me. And I didn't realize the impact that that had on me and how the impact that that has on other children. Because people grow up and they're in classrooms with people, they probably feel alone in that classroom already because of they're probably one of the only Black people there. And it can be a bit harmful to the brain of a child to see everybody that they're learning about, every successful person that they're learning about, being somebody that does not look like them. And the only times that they get to see people that look like them is on TV or in sports or in music. And so they associate their own kind to only be able to succeed in places like arts and music and sports, whereas we are equipped and we are also as intelligent as everybody else to be able to know things and to be intelligent in fields that are outside the arts. So for example, like medicine or science or STEM, for example. Not saying that music or art that there's anything wrong with it, but it gives a more rounded view when we learn about people who are figures in history like that. And that's something that I definitely learned in Black Studies. I learned about a lot of people who were actually significant figures, and it helped me to, it kind of assured me that yes, it is possible for me to succeed in future. And I think that it is important for us to, even like with the current discussion that's happening now on Black Lives Matter, I feel like in Ireland it's important for us to actually go out of our way to see how we can incorporate this into the current curriculums in secondary schools and primary schools, so young children who are Black and other minorities too get to see people that look like them. I feel like something that's very important is the education system, and I feel like representation in the education system is extremely important. I feel like one thing that a man called Carter G. Woodson said, he is the founder of Black History Week, and I have his book here actually, and one thing that he quoted was, "There would be no lynching if it did not start in the schoolroom. Why not exploit, enslave, or exterminate a class that everybody is taught to regard as inferior?" And what he meant by this was essentially this. He was saying that if in schools we are only taught of Black people through the lens of colonialism and never through the lens of success or capability, we will only ever see them through that lens. And thus everybody who learns with that mindset is only going to see Black people underneath that like film or something. So like children will see that, oh, all my ancestors were slaves. They weren't inventors, they weren't scientists, they weren't engineers, they weren't musicians. They'll only see them through a particular lens, and that's harmful. And so it's important that we try to incorporate these things, just so not just Black people will know, but so people of all colors will know. White people will know, Asian people know, everybody will be aware of these things and be aware that success is not limited to whiteness. And one thing that Dr. Ebun particularly taught us was that when we speak of whiteness, we are not attacking individual white people. We are not saying that individual white people are bad. We are attacking the system of whiteness, the system of privilege that leaves a lot of people feeling inferior and leaves a lot of people feeling like they are powerless in society. And we are trying to dismantle that system. We are not trying to dismantle individuals. We are not saying that individuals themselves are bad, but we are saying the system as a whole, the system that oppresses people that do not have a perceived color of skin or that have particular physical features. That's the system that we are trying to dismantle, so that, as the Black Lives Matter movement is saying, so that we can realize that that Black Lives Matter just as much as others do. And it's not to say that other lives don't matter as much. It's not to say that other ethnicities don't matter, but it's to say that right now the emphasis is on the fact that the system does not recognize Black lives to be as equal as other lives. They do not respect Black lives on the same level as other lives, and that's a problem, and we need to fix it. We are not trying to raise ourselves to be superior to anybody. We are just trying to be seen on a level playing field, and if that means we have to emphasize a particular group of people until that thing happens, then that's what we're going to have to do. So I think it's really important that we do that. And something else that I learned in the module was the fact that Blackness is something that exists only in white spaces. As in Africa, one of our modules, one of our lectures was called Are Africans Black? And what that lecture really spoke about was how in Africa, people in Africa would not really refer to themselves as Black. They would refer to themselves as, and according to their own ethnicity, according to their own tribe, and where they're from, etc. You wouldn't stand out as a Black person in Africa. That's what essentially I'm saying. However, once you step into a white space, for example, when you move abroad, you suddenly become Black. So Blackness is something that you are not necessarily born, but you are born into, like you become throughout your life because of it's something that's determined by how other people treat you. It's determined by how you are treated by the system. It's determined by how people look at you and how they decide to base assumptions just on the way you look. And this often does not happen until you are in a space where you become aware and you become conscious of your skin color and your physical features. And it's something that was really interesting to me, because I never realized that when I go home, for example, when I'm on holidays in Nigeria, which is where I'm from, I'm not aware of my blackness. However, as soon as I enter the airports in Dublin, all of a sudden I'm aware of it, because of blackness is something that exists almost in contrast to whiteness, as in people are it's kind of why I see it like this. It's kind of why a lot of white people kind of see the topic of race as a taboo topic or something that shouldn't really be spoken about. And it's because of it is common that white people see because of that's all they're surrounded with, they kind of see it as the default in a sense. And for that reason, when people start speaking on things like blackness and of Black studies, it can be seen as, no, that it's not important, it's not something that we really need to speak about. However, there are other people on the other hand who that's all they are aware of, and that's all that they're conscious of. And so it's important to listen to the voices of those people, because you can't really understand something until you yourself can hear. If you haven't experienced it, at least you can't understand something until you listen out to the voices of those who are speaking. So I'm really happy for this module. I'm really happy that I got to participate in it. And one of the main things that I took out of it was this. I think Dr. Evans said it in her first lecture, and it was that it is not enough to know this information. It is not enough to just be aware of Black studies, but we must act. Everything that we get in the classroom, we must bring it outside the classroom. It is not enough to unlearn things. We must use the information that we have learned to bring change in society. And that's something that as the process recently went on, I was protest, and Beulah was also there. I think she was part of it. I realized a lot of things that I wasn't aware of before. And once I became aware of those things, it now became a new responsibility upon me to go out and make sure that the inequalities in society, and particularly the injustices in society, don't continue. So I'm really glad for everything that I learned, and yeah, that's it.
Thank you very much, Agongo. That's very inspiring and very passionate. Now let's move on to Whitney and Mafidon. Whitney is a third-year radiography student at UCD, and she's the former secretary for UCD African Society. Whitney?
Hi, everyone. I'm very glad to be here. So when Dr. Ebun asked me or emailed me a few weeks ago to talk about this, I was like, it was actually at the start of what was going to be like a very tense situation in America and obviously around the world, as everyone can see. So I want to do a little bit of just history on Black Studies itself. So Black Studies was founded during the mid 1960s to early 1970s, and it was during the really tense political atmosphere of the civil rights movement. So at this time, students in America, they went on strike for 5 months because they were really just tired and fed up, and they wanted Black Studies to be in their institutions. They wanted it to be in the places in their education. So they went on strike for 5 months, and then after that 5 months, by 1971, by 1971, there was over 500 programs, departments, and institutes set up just for Black Studies. So that misrepresentation and lack of representation and lack of inclusivity is something that I think a lot of Black students in Ireland can relate to, because in the education system, we don't see ourselves, we're not really represented. We don't get to be around people who share our experiences. We don't get to be in front of teachers who understand us or look like us. And that, like Agoga said, has a really detrimental effect on us growing up. So we are surrounded by this Eurocentric syllabi. We're surrounded by Eurocentric beauty standards. And it means that our voices are suppressed. We don't get the opportunity to speak out and talk. I can remember in secondary school and in primary school, I always felt very, very isolated, and I would purposely not speak in school because I just felt like my voice was not important enough to be heard. I was very, very quiet. And we would be learning things like in history, we would learn about Christopher Columbus. And to this day, I can still remember the name of every single Christopher Columbus ship that was used on his voyages. But we never really learned about what he did when he went on those trips. We never learned about like the people that he killed and murdered and all the lives that he took. We learned about the Spanish conquest of the Aztecs, but we never learned about the fact that they brought so many diseases with them, which literally slaughtered like over 70% of their population. Even in English, in my favorite subject, when we read To Kill a Mockingbird, which was supposed to be this racially diverse book that was enlightening every student, we didn't focus on the fact that there was racial inequality. We never really focused on the criminalization of Black people and the fact that the justice system was set up against Black people in the book, as we can see. But we focused on the white savior characters of Atticus and Scout. And that really like affected me growing up anyway, because I just felt like there's just no voice here. None of this is relevant to me. None of this represents me or resonates with me in any way. So that's why Black Studies is so important, because it gives us a chance to have our voices heard and to see ourselves in a way that we've never seen ourselves before. So when I stepped into that class on the first day, and I looked around me, and for once I wasn't the minority in the class. I was like, around me were people who had the same experience that I did. They knew the same struggle that I had. They experienced the same things as me. They knew that they had the same banter and we could laugh at the same things. It was a really like enlightening feeling, and it was a feeling that I never really felt, that I never realized that I needed until I had it. So especially having a Black lecturer for the first time, this is the first Black teacher I ever had, and I just felt like it was the most comfortable place. Like those four walls during that semester was such a comfortable place to be in, because I felt like I could really, really speak, and I didn't feel like I had to be quiet or I had to be shut down, or I had to mute myself to be able to like make white people around me comfortable. I could speak up, I could say my opinions, and I wouldn't have any labels projected onto me. I think that the real issue with the fact that we don't get our voices heard is the fact that there's only a single story that's told. So like Agala said, we see the world through this white lens because we never get the opportunity to see it through another perspective. It's like this danger of a single story, which you'll learn about in the module if you do take it. It's the fact that we have an entire voice, an entire story is suppressed, and they don't get to speak up ever. So people get a perception that it isn't holistic, it's not true, it doesn't include everyone. And that's where like half-truths come in, that's where falsehoods come in, that's where biases come in, and stereotypes that aren't really founded in truth, because only one side is telling the story, and they're not telling it in the most true way that they could be. So like I said, Black Studies was the first time that I ever felt represented, because I was sitting around people who looked like me and experienced the same things as me. And it was actually a really surreal feeling. But I think that the issue is the fact that it took 18 years to get there. And I think that we need more Black educators, because without that experience, children are just growing up and they're not seeing themselves in any of these high positions. They don't see themselves in politics, they don't see themselves in education, they don't see themselves in these jobs that are like leadership roles. They're forced to always look at white people, and they think, okay, we can't do this because I've never seen someone like me do this. And it seems like so far out, and just like it's so separated from you, even though and obviously we're not learning about Black leadership in Africa, because in Africa all the leaders are going to be Black, but we don't learn about Africa, so we never get to understand this. We think we learn about America and how great America is, we learn about England and how great England is, and then we think like, oh, my country is not like this. And then you start to feel like ashamed, you start to feel like this feeling of being less than, and it's really frustrating when you realize that it's not true. So that's why it's so important to cancel out the single story, because that history from the white man's perspective, it will lead you to believe that what you are is less than inherently. And once you start to believe like you're less than, Carter G. Woodson has this quote, I don't know it off by heart, but it's basically like once you think that you're less than, you'll automatically take the lesser than position all the time in every situation. So you'll go for the lesser than jobs. You won't speak up when you're in a room full of people who you think are more important than you. So you're always going to feel like the subhuman and subclass, and that's something that has been pushed onto Black. That's a label that's been pushed onto Black people since the beginning of slavery. Because that's another thing that we learned in the course. It's the scramble for Africa. White people had to make it seem as if going after Africa was like they were doing us a favor almost. So they had to dehumanize Black people. They had to make it seem as if there was nothing of value there, when everything in Africa was valuable, from the people to what was coming out of the ground. Yeah, so Black studies helped me in a lot of ways, and one of the most important ways is that it helped me to learn how to articulate my points and to speak up, in the face of injustice, and just to open my mouth and speak. Because obviously, like I said before, I was very mute, I was very quiet. Growing up, I didn't really speak a lot in school. I used to get a lot of like praise for that from my teachers. They used to say, "Oh, she's so quiet. She doesn't make any noise. She doesn't make any trouble." But inside, I was actually always a very opinionated person. I just never felt like I could use my voice because of fear of being labeled as angry and dramatic, when I was really just being passionate about things that actually affected me. So, and that's a thing that a lot of Black people have to deal with, because when they step into white spaces, they always have labels put onto them. First of all, the label is Black, and then every stereotype that's associated with Black is put onto you, like loud and rowdy, and people are always shocked when you're able to articulate yourself. They're always shocked when you're able to speak good English. Oh, are you from here? Where are you from? It's these little things that are always associated with Black people, and it's not something that other people get to experience when they're white, because it's so out of their field of experience that, and even when you try and explain it to them, they'll just tell you that, oh, that's not really happening, that's not a thing, and they'll try and like make you feel like your experience is not true, and that's a really frustrating thing. But you have to be Black studies will teach you why they think like that, and then how to combat that, so then you can use your voice and get more people on your side to listen to you. So one of the things that we did in Black studies was a presentation. This was part of our mid-semester assessment. So we had to basically make a presentation about a Black movement, any Black movement. And the one that I chose was the hashtag Black Girl Magic movement. And this was one that really was important to me, and one that I was kind of thinking about talking about, whether it was in an essay or in a presentation, because growing up, I really struggled with with self-hate and looking at myself, because I was so completely surrounded from like my friends. Everybody was white, so I always felt like I need to be more like these people. And because I could never get to that stage, I always felt like I was less than, I was ugly, I was undesirable. But when we just in the presentation, I discussed Eurocentric beauty standards and how I had to unlearn everything that I had grown up to learn, everything that I thought was the best. I had to figure out a way to unlearn it and begin to focus more in on how these people have purposely put these standards there, knowing that they're unattainable for Black people, and to make them feel like they're less than. It's just all a system. And once you start to realize how things are connected, it is frustrating, but it also creates a zeal inside of you to want to strive for better for the next generation or for people around you. You don't want to have the same discussions forever. You want there to be change. So yeah, I did that presentation, and for me, even when I read back on it, or even when I think about the time that I did it, it was a very inspiring moment, because it was like me finally saying, okay, I don't need to look like this or to be like this in order to be beautiful. And I think that that's something that a lot of Black children, boys and girls, need to learn, because these standards are put on them and it's unfair. We also learned about intersectionality, which is basically just how you can be Black and you can be other things. You can be more than one group. And I think that's unfair when people put one label on you. But intersectionality is basically how I can say that I'm a Black and I'm female. Or if you were part of the LGBT community, you could say that I'm gay and I'm Black and I'm male and all these things. You can be more than one. And it stops people from putting just strict labels on you. And it's also really important when you're thinking about other movements as well. So we learned about the civil rights movement, the Scramble for Africa. We look at Black people in media and Black people in education. So there's a lot of opportunities for us to experience what I would call Black excellence, and to just learn about how Black people are so much more than what we've learned from our youth and what we see in the media. It's not just Black people are good at sports or Black people are good at music. Black people can be educators, they can be inventors, they can be teachers, they can be anything that they want to be. And they can't, it's not just because they're Black that they can be those things, it's because they're human. And that when we stop putting this label on them that, oh, you can only be this, this, and this, which is it's just something that a lot of Black students will tell you that they've experienced when they go to their guidance counselors in school, that they should say, oh, I think you should do a PLC, knowing full well that these students are very, very capable. They'll tell you to strive for less than, because that's what they feel like you're capable of. So by the end of the module, you'll be equipped with a lot of vocabulary, you'll be equipped with critical thinking skills and resources that you can, but also that you should feel obliged to carry into the outside world. And so when people are discussing things like police brutality, which is relevant right now, but also things closer to home like direct provision, you don't see it just from the surface level. You don't just look at it and say, oh, this is what it is and we can't really do anything, but you understand that there's systems at work that are keeping it this way, and you have to point out the underlying issues. You point out the flaws that are not just in the people, but are in the system, and you strive for change. Black Studies isn't just, it's not just a module that you take and then you forget about. It's something that you have to live and act on. It's basically a movement of itself, and it's so powerful because it really gives people that voice. And when I see my fellow Black peers doing podcasts and blogs, and even like recently I've seen a lot of my friends are in the newspaper, they're doing interviews for RTE, and it's just amazing to see, because finally, after what feels like decades, it's a chance for them to have their voices heard and to be the people that are seen. And the Black Irish experience is one that's really, really unique, because it's so new. It's very, very fresh in the world. And I feel as if people are missing out if they don't hear from Black Irish people, especially Black Irish youth. And that voice needs to be enhanced. And Black Studies, I think, is the perfect means to do that. So, yeah.
Thank you, Whitney, very much for another passionate summary. Now let's move on to Bula Izugo. Bula is a UCD Social Sciences graduate. Her study in the Black Studies module centered on the development of Black feminism and womanist thought. Bula is currently engages in a research-based curatorial practice that centers on anti-colonialism using visual art, activism, and the archive. She's currently an artist in residence in Science Gallery Dublin, where she's exploring how Black communities can use collective memory to contextualize their experience. Beulah?
Yeah. Hi. Good afternoon. I'm Beulah. I've actually written down all of my reflections from the module, so I'll be reading. I think I'll be echoing some of the sentiments of the other panelists, but I'll go ahead. So in my final semester of my final year in college, I enrolled in Black Studies and Critical Race Theory. It took a lot of juggling and rejigging to fit it into my timetable, but I did it because I knew that taking the module wasn't up for debate. Given that the academic institution is one of the most highly regarded, the idea that someone in that institution had fought for my chance to occupy space on the curriculum was just really wonderful to me. Taking the module wasn't solely an effort to learn about Black history. It meant being a participant in a cultural shift where a Eurocentric historical framework was being directly challenged. So throughout school, from primary to college, we are taught to speak the language of Eurocentrism. So that is centering our understanding of the world around the West at the expense of other cultures. So as Asante says, to assume that the Western Academy, as the Western Academy often does, that history starts with Europe or could be written by assembling only European facts is the grandest arrogance in human scholarship. It's possible for Eurocentricity to be a normal expression of culture, but it becomes a problem when that very particular culture is presented as universal while denying and degrading other cultural and political views. People of African descent have a long and rich history, and the subjugation and colonization of African people has resulted in that history being really severed and muddied. So the suppression of anyone's personal, economic, or cultural expression creates a state of oppression, meaning that the enforcers of those systems are oppressors. The Irish state didn't play a role in any of that colonization directly, being colonized people themselves, but by maintaining education systems that just center European cultural frameworks as a default, it means that you are participating in that subjugation. Ireland has a really rich and growing population of ethnic minorities and a long-established population of travellers with their own cultures and values, and leaving these stories outside of the education systems means you're actively writing them outside of history. UCD's inclusion of Black studies in the curriculum for the first time did feel like a huge move towards progress, but it also felt really overdue. It felt like the very first steps were finally being taken to right a very immense global wrong. So in my very final semester of my final year of education, I was able to leave with actual grounded knowledge of Black history and its development and its impact. Having to research and read and discuss and form a solid political analysis of race and its implications was a huge shift from what you could call troker box history, where Africans are seen as problems or issues to be handled by Eurocentric examination. The way that Black people through history have acquired and transmitted their knowledge is really varied. Indigenous groups in Nigeria, where I'm from, relied on oral transmission and human memory, meaning that knowledge was shared through stories and songs. Enslaved and free Africans in the United States picked up knowledge through stories and whispers, and those who were literate secretly communicated to their fellow men what they knew of their heritage. These early Black teachers and preachers gave private lessons in Black history and culture. Their secret classrooms were fields, working groups, restricted social gatherings, and Black churches. And it's been said that the function of the university is to replicate the already existing class order or social structure. So with that in mind, being able to sit together with other Black students in a classroom during a lecture led by a Black lecturer, studying race, the exact same way that people have done before us, felt like a very, very powerful subversion of that. There's required reading and essay writing, but most of our learning actually came from anecdotes and conversations between ourselves. So it was really important for me to see that you could learn about Black culture using a Black cultural framework. I can't help but wonder what this would look like, or what it would look like if this mode of learning extended to other subjects, if there was more Black teachers and lecturers, or if learning was as dynamic and discursive as it was in that module rather than fixed and encased, or if learning would center the personal as much as it centers the formal. So in the module, I did my final essay on Black feminist development and practices in the late 1970s. In this study, I learned about consciousness raising, which was a practice popularized by women's liberation groups. Women would get together in groups to talk about political issues and how they impacted their personal lives and how they coped. Consciousness raising groups were also a space where women could do other activist work such as fundraising or advocacy, but overall the function of those groups was to discover how and what other women taught and to build individual and collective resilience. In this climate, there is a really palpable desire to overhaul certain systems. There's been a really big focus on anti-racism lately and a global pursuit for racial justice just in America and everywhere else. We've even seen that here. There's a push for a Black Studies module in Trinity as well. So to all my fellow Black folk who are listening, who are lecturers or former students or hopefully future students, it's important that we replicate the consciousness raising practices now to vocalize our knowledge and formulate questions that lend themselves to imagining a better world. So with that in mind, I have several questions that were inspired by my study that I'd like to reflect on and have been reflecting on since I've left college. So first is, How do we disseminate Black cultural theory to those that can't access academia due to ability or structural barriers? How can we rapidly make Black studies accessible outside of the institution? What does Black studies look like when it is outside of the institution? How do we translate all the knowledge that we got from that module into political and social practices that center care and utility? How do we function in institutions without being classified solely as objects of inclusion or representation? It's clear that the institution has realized it must perform liberatory politics in order to meet our collective demands, but often behind the scenes, nothing actually changes. We still experience systems that demand conformity to its own values. The notion of inclusive is the idea that Europe is classified above other cultural spheres and not alongside them. Communication between cultures is a co-cultural affair and not an affair of a superior and inferior culture. So what does the academy, or what does the academic institution look like as a co-cultural affair when there are several storytellers and curriculum makers instead of one? While we push for more Black Studies modules here, we have to remember that decolonizing knowledge doesn't only need to take place in the global north. Colonial education systems in former colonies are still built in the mold of the former colonial powers. So how do we extend that hand to those at home, and how do we learn from them without talking over them? The scale of how what hegemony renders so much of our past unknowable can't be minimized. So how do we dig up the bones of the past so that we can ground ourselves and contextualize ourselves now? How do we preserve the present so that we can tell our own stories in the future? Studying critical race theory meant studying who gets to speak and who gets to be silenced, what stories are told and how, and whose voices are authoritative and part of the canon while others are left on the margins. So for myself and probably most others, Black Studies marked the beginning of the road to reimagining and restructuring something different for ourselves inside the lecture room and outside the lecture room as well. So our individual realities are too complex to be understood using just one framework. Who do we pass the mic to next? So those are my reflections from the module. I think, like I said earlier, they're very similar to the other two panelists, but thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eula. Wait, can you hear me? Yeah.
I'm muted, sorry, yes.
Let me just go back. Okay, sorry. Yeah, now finally, we have a final last minute speaker, Nave O'Kelly. Nave, if you can give a brief introduction to yourself and then discuss the Black Study, your experience with the Black Studies module.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Hello, my name's Neve O'Kelly. I'm a third year politics and sociology student in UCD. First of all, I'd like to thank everyone for the privilege of talking here today. Professor Ebun's class taught me so much about Black studies and critical race theories, but during the short time I have to speak, I'll talk mainly about the lessons that were most personal to me and the lessons that I use to educate those around me. Firstly, from an Irish perspective, I have learned to rethink the thought patterns that I've had about the history of my people, which I've accumulated throughout my life so far in Ireland. Growing up in Ireland, we often learn about the struggles our people faced and the obstacles they overcame. And Irish people did suffer for generations, as I'm sure you all know. However, our skin colour allowed us to escape oppression and find better life for generations to come in ways that would not necessarily be possible for other colonised countries. An example of this can be seen when thousands of people emigrated from Ireland in search of a better life. Many went to America, where they took long and painful journeys across dangerous seas and lands. And like many asylum seekers in the world today, all they had was hope. When they arrived in America, they would first experience high levels of discrimination. However, if they married another Caucasian person and had children, their children would have white skin, receive an American education, and have an American accent. The level of discrimination would decrease through time, and now having Irish ancestors is something that is widely celebrated in America. Contrast this now to someone who emigrated from any American country in search of a better life, Contrast this now to someone who emigrated from an African country in search of a better life in America. They can never be free from racial oppression because it is impossible to unlearn the color of your skin. Racial oppression is something their bloodline suffers from generations later. I've used this example, which Professor Ebun taught me during my Black Studies class many times when discussing white privilege with other white Irish people, so I can help to educate those around me about the injustices that are happening, so that we may open our eyes and stop racial injustice in Ireland, now that we are lucky enough to be a developed country. Secondly, from a European perspective, Professor Ebun's class helped me to realise that racial injustice is stitched into every historical fact that we believe to be true. The Eurocentric ideals that exist in our historical education system throughout our lives. And if children are taught something as a fact, oftentimes they won't question it. And they'll carry these facts with them throughout their lives. When discussing this topic, I often pose the question, who discovered America? Like Whitney said, in school, we learn it was Christopher Columbus. However, he was not the first person on the continent, he was simply the first European. Professor Ebun's class also opened my eyes to Afro-pessimistic ideas that circulate throughout Europe and the importance of unlearning these negative thought processes. On a more personal level, Professor Ebun's class opened my eyes to how people of colour suffer in Ireland and around the world, and I will never again close my eyes to these injustices. I will never again close my eyes to the way I benefit from being white, and in every professional environment I am in future, I will always look around at my colleagues and notice who is not there, and I will question why they are not. I now understand that I, as a white person, am responsible for actively recognising my privilege in situations and calling out racism whenever I see it, even if I face criticism or ridicule for doing so. Professor Ebun's class was one of the most well-taught educational classes I've taken in UCD so far. Above all, I have learned that it is not enough to not be racist. I must be actively anti-racist so that I can help to create a country, a Europe, and a world that is diverse and inclusive for all beings. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your wonderful perspective there. Now we're going to switch over to Dr. Joseph. Ebun, are you there?
Screen. Yes, I'm here.
Okay, I'll stop sharing and then you can share.
Okay, and I will just try and just do that in 5 minutes because I think they've said everything that I needed to say, you know, and I don't know if there's anything else I can add to that. And okay, I'm just going to move this away from there so I can go to the slideshow. Okay, so just quickly, thank you so much again. And I think that you do this to me all the time because when I went to the event you organized in November, I had nothing to do with it. I just got an email from the students who said they were organizing an event called A Glimpse into Black Studies. And come, and that Black students were, the students from the class were going to be talking about what they learned. I mean, I sat down for 1 hour and I heard this and I was like, oh my God, they got it, they got it, they got it. And I think that is the most important thing because when we teach, it's important that you understand that we're not trying to remove or to erase white knowledge, but that we're saying that how can we as a people, as nations, how we have the full perspective. You know, imagine if life was all day and never night, we would have missed out something. Imagine the beauty of the night when you see the light in there and what you can see looking at life from the perspective of nighttime. And it's the same thing that we bring a different perspective, you know, when we come into the story and look at all of those things. This is, you know, we're right in the middle of it where we're talking about Black Lives Matter. And I ask the question all the time, do all lives matter or only some lives? You know, and again, because I won't go through it, but our statistics, our census data shows us that the people at the bottom of the ladder, not just in Ireland, in the UK, in the US, everywhere in the Western world are a group of people. And we ask ourselves, why is it not changing? I believe that education, our education system is the major culprit, that we have not done enough We have not done enough. There is so much more that we can do. When you think about it, and those are key questions we look at, when you think of Africa, what images come to your mind? How is Africa and its people portrayed in our education system? So those are the key things. You begin to, where did we learn all of these things? And so when we look at what people like Kataji Woodson talks about, he just talks about the Negro education, that, the Black person, and you have heard these students talk about it today, it is only a Black person's education in the Western world that begins with a knowledge of an education about other people. How does my education start? By you teaching me other people. How does my education start? By you teaching me a perspective of myself that teaches me how to inferiorize myself. We create an identity crisis. We create a problem for a group of people. So it's really, really important, and Kataji Wilson calls that the miseducation of the Negro. Again, come for the lecture and you can get all of that. So I won't go into that. But so really what this Black Studies module did, and what Black Studies does is that it actually places Black students in the middle of their education. That particularly in the Western world, what it does is you actually create a space where they are not on the outside looking in. It's about you. You're the center. You're centered. And I ask that question all the time. Where in our education system are Black students centered? Where do we center them? And so when we do not have programs like Black Studies or Africana Studies, then we miss out. And these are, part of the assignments we did, the midterm essays, was for the students to think about, they should look at a Black movement, anyone at all, and then they worked in groups and came up with the different Black movements they wanted to talk about. So this was presentation. I mean, I was like a clocking hen when I was watching them give just the same way. I don't know if any of you just, I'm just enthralled just listening to you guys. So I'm like, oh my God, I'll soon be out of a job. These girls are trying to take my job. But it was just the same thing that day when I watched the variety of topics, that they brought, and they brought in that these are the issues that were important to them. One of the topics they talked about during the midterm essay was the natural hair movement. Where in our education system do we talk about natural hair for Black kids? It's not there, it's not anywhere at all. But that was one of the topics they talked about. This year, some of the students looked at the Say Hi, and interestingly, they were young lads who did this, who did the presentation. So they don't understand all of this perspective. So they're able to cover all of that. And this was a presentation from the students. Another group looked at, Black excellence. They looked at the Black excellence movement, what it means. So that was another group of presentation that students. So these were not students who said these are the issues that they were important to them and they wanted to talk about. Another group looked at end female genital mutilation, and we looked at Haitian revolution. That's another group, and one group looked at Black girl magic. So these are interesting topic, soul music and its role to civil rights movement. So these were presentations that the students made. I'm just saying that, where in our education system, does that come in? So the question we ask really, what should we teach? So if this was a workshop and I was doing the whole thing, I would talk about different things. But number 3 of what I say we should teach, that there's a whole thing that gets there. But number 3 of what I say we should teach is how we exercise anti-racist judgment. How do we exercise that kind of judgment? When we look at adverts like this, forgetting the racist, again, we use this, as part of the lectures to understand, stories and how to tell stories and how to understand what you see. But what I'm saying to us today is that these adverts were made by people who we trained. They went to our schools. You, all of us, we are the educators who trained the person and the people, the marketing people who use these adverts. We trained the people who produce these Dove adverts. We trained the people who produce these adverts. So our education system, at one point, we trained the journalists who thought it was okay to depict the babies with a monkey. We trained that person. Our education system is incomplete. And that's what I'm saying. When we do not have African studies, when we do not have Black studies, our education system is incomplete. We we are damaging the people we are producing. We're fighting about Black Lives Matter today. Why are we still going to keep doing that? We are going to keep doing that. We fought, we marched in 2014 for Eric Garner. We marched, we are marching for Breonna Taylor. We'll march, for every one of them. How do we change that? Education is the only system that touches everyone. Everyone, our politicians, our educators, our human resource people, our education system is the only thing that touches them. So where do we and where can we center race? That's my question. Where do we center race and where can we center race? Thank you very much. That's my presentation. Susan? Susan?
Susan is muted.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Joseph.
Okay.
We got some lovely comments. Nora Trent said, thank you for these excellent presentations and for sharing your experiences and reflections so eloquently. And Lorraine O'Driscoll said, such an amazing and competent panel of ladies, really enjoying listening and learning. We have some questions for you guys, if you're okay to answer. Grace Darcy asked, what was the process behind getting this module implemented in third level? How can we introduce this content at an earlier stage in the Irish education system in primary and secondary schools?
That should come for me. I think the only thing that is the will. There's no will. There's no will. After I taught Black Studies in UCD for 1 year, and it was precarious. I mean, I can't even explain to you how I managed to teach it in UCD. And that's why I said no college, no university to take the glory for it. It was precarious. Every time I had to go and teach it, I had to use my annual leave from a full-time paying job to go there and teach it. So it was a precarious work that I had to do, but it was so important that I had to do it. For me, and even right now, I've changed my job to go part-time so that I can focus and do that at my own expense if I have to do that. It's the lack of will. That's the reason it is not in primary schools and in secondary schools. We have every other studies, gender, sexuality. We do not have African studies. We do not have a center or an institute of African studies. We are falling down. There's nothing required to do it. We just need to say we want to do it and put it, and it will be done. So yeah, it just is the lack of will. We do not have heads of schools and who think that African studies is important, that we do not, that's why, I wake up some days and I'm singing Michael Jackson's song in my head. They don't really care about us, and that's what's going in my head because I'm like, who cares about us? So we have to care.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Ebun. This question is actually for our panelists, Agogo, Whitney, Beulah, and Niamh. So if any of you guys want to respond to this one, it's from Abigail. How has the module impacted your outlook on life and how you think about the future? Anyone would like to take that one?
Okay, I'll take the question. I think that it's really opened my eyes to a lot of biases in the system as we're talking about, because we've mentioned education a lot. It opened my eyes to a lot of things I didn't realize. It made me realize how people, just how embedded racism kind of is in the system. I didn't realize how much it was like that before. And Dr. Ebun once gave this analogy of basically a few people standing in a line. Say there's 5 people, and the person she contrasted the person at the back of the line to the person at the front of the line. And she basically put it like this: the person who is behind is able to see everything that is in front of them. He's able to see all the people in front of them, anything that's happening, they can see it. But the person who's in the front, they only see what's in front of them. And if you are in front, you're not seeing what's behind you. You're not seeing the pain that's there. You're not seeing, you can't empathize with people because all you're doing is looking from your own perspective. However, when you are at the back, and the back people represent essentially oppressed people, you can see everything. You can see both what privileged people are seeing, and you can see both what you yourself, who isn't so privileged, is seeing. And it made me, it's a simple analogy, but it really made me realize why some people think the way they do and why the system is the way it is. And it made me realize how it put in me a kind of a desire to make sure that this changes and that people don't feel comfortable having those types of mentalities, because it's damaging. It's damaging to the people behind you if all you ever focus on is what's in front of you. And so I think that it's important now that we are aware of this, and particularly because of conversations are happening now, it's important for us to actually go out of our way to make sure that people do not continue to think in those ways. So to call it out when we see it, when we see people who refuse to acknowledge the pain of others, it's important for us to call it out, and also to make sure that other people, like such as children, do not develop those mindsets. I saw some of the questions and they were like, what changes would we like in the secondary school system or in the education system? Personally, what I would think would be that, for example, in primary school, we learn about we learn about world history in primary school, not on a deep level, not on a profound level, but we learn about it on a basic level. And I think that African history can be incorporated into that. There are a lot of there's a lot of things that we can learn about Africa, such as I'm not sure the name of the empire. I think it's the Mali Empire. That was one of the richest in the world at the time. And that's something so simple that if you just put that into the brain of children, particularly Black children, it would make them realize that, oh, it's not only like, what's it called? Success and finances isn't only limited to whiteness. It's not only limited to this. If we see that people who look like us have been the richest at some point of history, it's pretty encouraging to ourselves. And I would say for secondary school education, something that I would think would be very beneficial would be obviously history, because you can go into it in depth, but also English. I feel like in English, for example, we could incorporate a Black poet into the poetry curriculum. And it seems something simple, but a lot of the things that Black poets would speak about, because I know that when I studied English in secondary school, we didn't only learn about the poem, but we would learn about the reasons why they wrote that poem and the history behind it. And I feel like that's a way for people to learn about Black experience, to learn about the experiences of people that they can't really understand, because you are forced to enter that mindset. And especially if you have to write essays on that, you have to learn about, one, the history of the person and the reasons why they wrote the things they did. So for example, if you're writing something on an African-American poet or an African poet, that they're talking about what they experienced, both as a Black person and just as a human being in general, it will help people of all colors and of all races to be able to see, to be able to basically understand their experience from that point of view. So yeah.
Thank you, Ekoko.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, now we have a question from Lisa. She says, thanks so much for putting this on. Has there been any moves towards Athena Swan, which seems to be the key measure HEI's work towards equality to focus beyond gender? Does anyone know?
I can say yes. Athena Swan actually has what's the word now? There's a group, you know, on a national level, who is looking at, you know, a lot of different things, you know, around intersectionality. So it's the Athena Swan Intersectionality Working Group. Again, you know, these things are really quite slow. We've been here for a long time, you know, so that is happening. You know, and those conversations are happening, you know, like looking at conversations like, you know, what should people be called, you know, the labeling, you know, the naming in our census and all of the categories in our census. So we're looking at all of those things. I am part of that. Well, I was invited to be part of the intersectionality working group. So that is there, but I think that we are too slow. You know, this is 2020, you know, people are dying, people are unwell, you know, and we need to move fast. We need to, I can't for me, I feel there's a sense of urgency, and I'm sick and tired of being in 20 different meetings that goes nowhere. We are having meetings upon meetings. You know, you're part of all kinds of committees, and you are meeting for 2 years, we're still meeting. And like, what did it take me to get the Black Studies module going? It was not rocket science, because I embodied the knowledge. It was not rocket science. The minute I got a phone call, it's going to be able to happen. And that was it. I put the module together and it ran. It's not rocket science. It's the will. If the will is there, if the space is there, it can be done. You know, so it's just the will. It's not rocket science. It's when people, it's like getting a pilot, an expert pilot who has never flew a plane. That's why we have a problem. People are trying to set up African studies or teach. They've never been African. They don't even know what it means to be Black. They don't embody our Blackness. I can't take off this coat of Blackness. I live it every day. So it's not a head knowledge, it's a lived experience. So when we teach, I don't need to spend hours and hours learning how to teach. I don't need to do, because I embody it. You know, so it's the reason, because we always still do want the white person at the top of it teaching it. You know, we have race experts who have never experienced racism. Like, our experts in racism have never experienced racism. So I'm like, stop it. You know, so it's not rocket science. If the will is there, I promise you I can say this and get it running in no time. And just to be clear, for anyone who is listening, I've moved beyond the module. So I'm not doing the module anymore. It is all or nothing. We are getting an Institute of African Studies. We do not want just modules anymore. We want an institute. We want a whole course. We want programs that are run. We want to make sure that from our secondary schools, our primary schools, the Department of Education needs to have this on their agenda. We're done trying to have one single module. Sorry.
No, please don't apologize. That's why we're here to all understand. I think Joanne has the next.
So we have just one or two more questions. Lorraine O'Driscoll asks, it seems to me that a lot of us who are not Black should also be undertaking Black studies. From what I've heard today, I'd be really interested. I'd like to know the panel's view on this, and I wonder if many people who are not Black have taken up this course so far.
Hi, can I answer this question?
Sure.
Yeah, I think it's really, really important that white people take this Black Studies module, and not just the Black Studies module, but try and educate yourselves outside of Black Studies. Because obviously, like Ebun said, like it's not always going to be up to Black people to educate white people on racism and the systemic racism that we have to experience. We have, like, it's up to everybody themselves to go out and educate themselves, because I think that white people don't. First of all, you have to recognize that you're living in a position of privilege all the time, and people in power are always more likely to listen to you and to take in what you say. So I could say something, and someone my age, same course, same everything as me, but white, could say the same thing, and they'd get way more people listening to them. And that is because they have that white privilege behind them. But if there's not enough white people like me talking about this, then it never gets up to where it never goes to where it needs to go to. And I think it's frustrating as Black people, because we always feel like we have to have a white voice behind us for us to really be heard. But at the same time, if you want to be helpful, if you want to see change, if you want to stop having the same conversations, then we need to come together. It's a thing of people banding together and saying, okay, enough is enough. And I think that when we've seen protests in America, we always see that, like, that there's white people coming out and stepping out in front and making sure that there's a barrier between the police and the Black people, because they know that there's that opportunity, that they know that there's not a chance that they're really going to get hurt. And I think that says a lot. Even just an image of it itself, that speaks volumes, because we know that, okay, white people are always going to be in this position. Utilize it, weaponize it, and say, okay, we're going to take this chance, and we're going to speak up for people who aren't being listened to. So even outside of Black studies, educate yourself on the struggles that Black people face, and you can you can do so much with just a Twitter account. You don't need to just be on TV or any kind of important space. Just having a social media account can get your voice out there and get more and more people listening to you. So.
Thank you, Whitney. It's super practical. I lived in the States for over 20 years and just moved back to Ireland a couple of years ago. And it is eye-opening and inspiring and encouraging to see those protests, those joint protests, both in the States and here in Ireland and elsewhere in the world. I have a question here from Kira for Dr. Joseph. Do you think race is a social construct?
Oh, am I still on? Yes. I mean, the first thing we learn about race is that race is a social construct. It is real, yet at the same time, it is not real. It is not real because, you know, it's not a tangible thing, but it is real in its consequences. So it is socially constructed, but it is real. The meaning of race in 1808 and the meaning of race in 1908 are two different things. Yes, they are all, the root is the same, but at one time, that race meant that you couldn't vote, you couldn't, you know, if you were caught, you could be enslaved, do you understand? So it meant, so in 1950, 1960, the meaning of race changed again. You could go to school or you could be on the buses, you know, so you can see how that race changes. If you're in South Africa, the meaning of race changes. If you're in Nigeria, the meaning of race changes. So it changes with time and space, you know? Yes, they are all from the same root, but it changes. So that means that it is a social construct. Within the different spaces we constructed. The key thing we must remember is that race is hinged on white supremacy. I just wanted to buttress a point someone was making that race is hinged on white supremacy. Racism is hinged on white supremacy. We did not create white supremacy. Black people did not create white supremacy. And so we need the bystanders to stop being bystanders. We need the allies to actually act. And you know, when I was preparing for this, I was thinking, what would have happened if the bystanders that what George Floyd kneeled until he died, if those bystanders, you know, apart from taking the video, they helped us by taking those videos, but what if they had pushed the guard off him? George Floyd would not be there today. So again, it is bystanders. We did not create white supremacy. So to unseat it, we can disrupt it, and that's what we're trying to do. We are talking about dismantling it, but you have to be the ones to dismantle the systems because we did not create it. We are not the ones controlling it, and we are not the ones occupying it.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Ebun. And the main point is we all have the power within ourselves to make change, and for us not to forget that. So we need to conclude on that powerful note, and we definitely want to thank our panelists. We had Agogo, we had Whitney, we had Beulah, Nave, and then of course, Dr. Ebun Joseph. Thank you all for coming today. We went a little bit over time, but we felt it was important enough to get through some of these questions and to have the conversation continue. And hopefully the conversation will continue. But as far as our next event, we have that coming up. We invite you to join WIRI for our next event, which will be either June or July. The date is not yet confirmed. We're still putting it together, but it will feature Angela Saini, who is author of Inferior, and also her latest book, which is entitled Racism, The Return of Race Science. Please follow us on social media for more information as the event unfolds. And it will be produced in connection not only for WIRI, but Women in Technology and Science, Lean in Ireland, UCD Surgical Society, and other groups. So thanks to everyone for attending today, and we look forward to more conversations on race relations.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.